On Tuesday, July 14th, Epic Games hosted Unreal Fest Online, which is a free one-day virtual event. Speakers and presenters from companies like Audi, Fox Associates, Rocksteady Studios, Zero Density, and many from Epic Games came together to present the 50 sessions, which are still available on demand, and if you go to Unreal Fest Online 2020, you will get access to this content. It will take you to a site where all the sessions are still available, and they are listed across architecture, automotive, games, film, television, and events, cross-industry. One of the ones that I strongly encourage you all to look at if you're interested in more information about Unreal Engine 5 is this Unreal Engine for next generation games. If you click on the on-demand video, you will be allowed to watch the
It lets
video.
tech artists create complex, high-level controls on top of an animation skeleton, as well as enabling per-bone procedural control. Control Rig is currently available in experimental form and is planned to be fully production-ready in UE5. Also today, Rigid Body and Cloth Sim are fully supported with the new Chaos Physics system, and we have a new animation debugging tool built into Unreal Insights coming up in 4.25. If we look to the future though, we've got some really cool stuff coming up. First is a full-body IK solver that will be shipping in 4.26. It's important to note that this is just the solver, but we'll be building a set of tools and APIs around it for UE5 to integrate more fully into the pipeline. Also in UE5,
you can see that there's a tremendous amount of content available, specifically focused on Unreal Engine 5. And if you're interested in this and sharing this with your students, I strongly encourage you watch this video. But additionally, all of these videos will continue to be available on this site at least for the next week or so. And as typically we do at Epic Games, much of it will probably be put on our Unreal Engine YouTube channel, as well as learn.unrealengine.com. So you've got a busy summer ahead of you, watching all of this content, learning from it for Unreal Engine, Twinmotion, as well as Quixel Megascans. We hope you enjoy this material. Once again, all of this is completely for free. We encourage you to take full advantage of it and learn, learn, learn. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting stream. Today, we've got a stream about becoming a AAA game artist, and we've got some amazing guests today. We've got, of course, usually Mark Flanagan is joining us today, and he will be helping answer questions in the chat. Tom Shannon is not with us today. He's not feeling very well. We hope you feel better, Tom, but we do have some amazing guests today. We've got 4 character artists from Epic Games with very diverse backgrounds to help us really flesh out this topic, because I think it's a really amazing topic for those of you who are instructors, those of you who maybe are aspiring character artists. We've got Vitali, who's joining us here, who's one of the character artist leads. We also have Justin Holt here. We've got Adam Scott. Justin is one of our senior texture artists. Adam is also one of the works on special projects, also a senior character artist. And we also have Colby Jukes, who's also a character artist, but also is focusing on outsourcing as well. So we've got a lot to talk about. Each one of them is going to present today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit here as well. We've got a lot of really great stuff to cover. All of these really talented guys have really diverse backgrounds. Many have been at Epic for quite some time. Some of them are somewhat new to Epic, but have been working in character art for quite some time. But let me let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. Maybe Vitali, would you introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then of course a little bit later you'll present a little bit more.
Sure. Hi, my name is Vitali Naimushin. I'm the character art lead on Fortnite. I've been at Epic for just a little over 5 years. The whole time been working on Fortnite. When I got here, I was the only character artist on Fortnite, which is kind of crazy to think about right now. But it's pretty awesome. I got to put a lot of myself into the project and got to do a lot of the core heroes, like Jonesy, Ramirez, Penny, a bunch of others, and kind of define the visual look of the game and the characters in the game. So before this, so I worked in the industry for about 16 years, worked at 5 different studios. This is my 5th one. I shipped numerous projects, numerous games, Before this, I was at Blizzard for 5 years. I worked on Overwatch, Diablo 3, Reaper Souls, and another cancer project called Titan. Before that, I worked at id Software on a game called Rage for 3 years. And then previously before that, worked at a couple of small studios that are unfortunately no longer around. Worked at Ritual Entertainment and Terminal Reality. That's pretty much it right now. I work at Epic. I work as a character art lead. And what that means is basically ensure that the team is running smoothly. So it's everything from people management, so recruiting, making sure we get the right people on the project, forming art tests, interviewing candidates, and then making sure that everything runs smoothly throughout the pipe. So from the beginning that they're tasked and that people are cast to do the right work to the moment that that actual character ships to the public. So making sure that everything running smoothly, schedules, things like that. And then lastly, just making sure that the people are growing. That's one of the things at Epic we really like to do is make sure that the talent is constantly growing and raising their bar and getting better and empowering people to grow. So that's me in a nutshell right there.
That's awesome. How many, I don't know if we can say this or not, but would you say roughly how many character people do we have at Epic? I mean,
a lot.
It's a lot, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because, Fortnite's a very character-driven game, and we have to make a lot of characters. So we need a lot of character people. I'd say in the last, since from Paragon to, Fortnite, we've needed a lot of character people. So the team has really grown quite a bit, and you've been really busy with that particular.
Absolutely. The team has grown tremendously, both in size and talent throughout this whole time. And I don't know if we can say necessarily how many people specifically we have, but it is the biggest character team I've worked on by
awesome.
far.
Perfect. Well, let's just follow the Brady Bunch group on the bottom and talk to Justin. Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself and, your background. And of course, like I said before, we'll each present individually and sort of share our work and stuff, but just tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do and stuff like that.
Sure. My name is Justin Holt. I am a senior texture artist at Epic currently. Before Epic, I spent about 15 years in the visual effects industry, working in films. Started out in lighting, just to get my foot in the door, and then very, very quickly moved into texturing, which is basically what I've been doing for the past almost 2 decades, I guess. And yeah, kind of what I love doing. And in terms of my background in character art, it is obviously very specific to texturing, but what I do in the personal projects besides film work is a lot of collaboration with people that model, and that's kind of my privy into this discipline that in games we call character art, whereas in films it's a bit more compartmentalized. But yeah, I've been at Epic since October and working on Fortnite.
Awesome. And, I think this will be interesting because, the workflow, as you just mentioned, is different between film character and game character art. And so maybe a little bit later, you'll help us understand sort of what some of those differences are. I know that I had a background working at Blue Sky on characters for robots in Ice Age. And that was very different than coming to a game studio where we consider character more like an asset versus in film, at least feature
it's
animation.
Discipline,
it's
really.
A very different sort of a workflow. Yeah. So, I noticed a big difference, especially working upstream, downstream, where you're working with a modeler or a rigger and that sort of stuff. And maybe we'll get a chance to flesh some of that out as well.
Yeah, we can definitely talk more about that, but definitely the two industries we're coming to kind of a convergence where we're seeing it kind of bleed left and right, which is really kind of exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Adam? You've also worked at some really big studios, and you're doing some really exciting work now at Epic as well.
Yeah, so I've been at Epic for about almost 4.5 years. When I came to Epic, I was originally on the Unreal tournament team, which is like a small group of us, like kind of like working with the community to make the new Unreal tournament. But when the opportunity to jump on special projects arose, I definitely went with that because they were doing some digital human stuff, and that's really what that's what interests me. So during my digital human time and the special projects time, we worked on the Meet My project, Project Siren. There was a little bit of the Andy Circus stuff that I helped with, and then from there, Fortnite, like when that was all going on, Fortnite blew up. So then, like it was kind of like all hands on Fortnite. So then I jumped back over to Fortnite to work on that, and it's such such a different workflow and different style, and like so different project size, right? Like it was like it couldn't be any more opposite. But that was like a good learning experience. That was a lot of fun. And then I stayed on Fortnite for quite a while. And then just recently I've moved back to special projects for I think the remainder of the year. So that's where I'm at right now. But prior to my being at Epic and jumping around like that, I was at Naughty Dog working on Uncharted 4. And then before that, I was at Ready at Dawn working on, I was there for about 4.5 years working on the Order 1886. And that was actually my first real job in the games industry, was at Ready at Dawn. And to me, it's like such a lucky spot to land, right? Because they had this like cool game coming out. There's like this really high quality art they were pushing. And I just happened to, like all their previous games were PSP games, and I was like, okay, where can I apply? I was applying different places, and then I applied there. They didn't tell me anything. I had no idea what the game was going to be, but you kind of get a sense when you do an art test, like, okay, this is the quality they're looking for, and I think I just lucked out and got the role there, and I mean, it really catapulted my career to where it is today. But that was my first game job. Before that, I worked in a movie studio for about a year up in Michigan. That's where I went to school. Mm-hmm. And then prior to that, I was just in school for a long time. So kind of like a quick background.
Yeah, the Order had some really unique character style too. It was super cool.
Mm-hmm. It was very much like, we wanted it to look realistic, but at the same time, like a stylized realism. You know what I mean? Like, so like, there's some like angular, some of the more like masculine characters would have like really hard angularity to the face. You push those angles in the hair, things like that. But it wasn't like an overtly stylized game, right? It was like little hits here and there that kind of made things read a certain way. But the idea was, very realistic in materials, proportion for the most part, and then just kind of pushing the silhouettes here and there to really get like sell certain things, certain feelings for the character.
And then another thing for those of you in the chat who are not familiar, so Adam mentioned Mike Seymour project and the Siren project, and then also the Andy Circus project. If you haven't gone to some of our GDC booths, we've had, in our SIGGRAPH booths, we did these special projects that took Mike Seymour, who, sort of a celebrity in computer graphics, and then of course Andy Circus, who is a movie star and does a lot of mocap, and we created digital doubles of them and brought them into real time as part of some tech demos that we did, and they're absolutely stunning visual representations, as well as Siren, which is a project that we did in collaboration with Tencent, and did some with Mike Seymour. It was done in virtual reality, so. We did something at SIGGRAPH where we did, live interviews in virtual reality with this character that had to perform at 90 frames a second. It was really quite amazing, but really hard to do because it was beautiful skin shaders, full hair, rendered at super high fidelity. And the Andy Circus stuff was really quite stunning too. So, at the time, I think it was the highest level of visual fidelity for digital humans. And then to be able to transition from that to, Fortnite style characters is really, shows the diversity that character artists are required to have in today's industry, right? Would you agree that is can be quite a challenge in this day and age?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's just such a different, like, I guess, lens that you're looking at the characters through, right? So like with things like, so like Mike Seymour or like Andy Circus or any of those guys, when you're looking at them, you're looking at like, how close am I matching this to a digital double, right? And you are like switching, like set cameras, trying to match it to like cameras, basically like looking at the skin pores really close, looking at it from a distance, like every way you can possibly look at it, you're trying to look at it to match it to that person, right? with Fortnite, it's you're more. For me, it's more of like a mid, like an overall read of that character, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like about zooming into the core level or anything like that, right? It's like how does this character look? What expression? Like when people look at this, like what are they expressing about themselves? You know what I mean? Like
It has to be fun.
Like I like dark
yeah.
characters, right? So the people kind of gravitate to what they want, and it's
Right.
more of like an entire character read than just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a digital double. So it's totally different. It's totally different.
Absolutely. Well, great. Let's talk to Colby for a moment. So you've got a also diverse background. You've come from some pretty big studios, and then you also have a really interesting job now here at Epic because you've got to look at a lot of art as well, and give a lot of feedback as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm one of the character art outsource leads on Fortnite. I've been doing this for about maybe under a year. Prior to this at Epic, I worked on Paragon as a character artist. I started my career in 2004 on the Castle Wolfenstein games at
Cool.
Raven Software. It's kind of the forgotten Castle Wolfenstein, the one nobody played. And then from there, I worked as a freelancer for a few years. Then I went to BioWare. I worked on Mass Effect 2 and 3. Then I went to Microsoft, and I worked on all of the Halo games that 343 Industries has shipped. Now I'm here. Yeah.
Sweet. So we'll get into definitely talking about the kind of work that you do as an outsource character lead, because I'm sure that you get to look at a lot of stuff, you give a lot of feedback, and making sure that people that aren't specifically inside of well, they're not in our building anymore because many of us are working remotely anyway because of the current conditions, but you I'm sure have to work with Vitali and many other seniors and leads to make sure that everything's on point and we have parity and unified looks and all that stuff. And I'm sure that has in and of itself is a really complicated thing to do. And there's a lot that goes into that. We've got a lot to talk about today. And part of one of the things that we want to cover in becoming a AAA character artist is, for those of you who maybe aspire to or are teaching other people, how to become better character artists. Because I know that myself, I have a background in teaching. I taught professionally for about 9 years in NYU and Savannah College of Art and Design. And I met hundreds of students who wanted to become character artists and had burning passions to become character artists, many of whom were very talented. But I'd say that in talking with, Vitali, Justin, Adam, and Colby, there's a lot that goes into it. And maybe you all would agree, maybe you wouldn't disagree, but I would say, I know quite a few character artists, but there aren't that many globally in the world, right? It's a job that many people want to do, but it's a hard job to get. Requires a tremendous amount of talent, requires a lot of discipline, and requires a lot. Just requires a lot, So how do you get there? How do you get to the show? What is it required from a portfolio perspective, a talent perspective, a skill perspective? I would say that everyone that I know at Epic probably works all day long as a character artist and then goes home and works a whole lot more on their own personal projects, has probably done that their entire career and is super passionate. And we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff today. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But before, we get into all of that stuff, what we really want to do is just let these guys tell you, about their journey, their personal journeys, and let them share with you, how they got here. Because working as a character artist at Epic, I think is probably a dream for many people. And so we wanted to give the opportunity for these guys to go a little deeper about, their individual journeys. And then we'll come back and talk about the specifics. Sound good to everyone? Sound good to you guys? Okay, cool. And, we've got a couple questions that are already coming in, and we'll definitely address your questions. But, why don't we get started with Vitali? And Vitali's going to share a screen and share some information with you all. And then we'll come back and get to all your questions. If you've already asked a question, please hold it and we'll come back and get to a bunch of other things that we want to talk about. So, without further ado, Vitali, please, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm just going to talk. I got into doing video game art back in high school, actually. So I was just, I like video games. I like computers. I built my own PCs as a kid, and it was a lot of fun. I played around with different software and different tools and things like that. And then one day, I found out you could mod games. So back then, this was like the early 2000s, and people were modding Quake 3. They were modding Unreal Tournament. There was this huge community of these amateur game makers. I guess not too dissimilar now, but now you've got UE4, which is super prolific, right? It's so easy to go and make a game. But yeah, back in the day, people would just, they'd open up Unreal Tournament and they'd start tinkering around, just put in a model here, change some settings, make your own game. And it was a lot of fun. It was super empowering to feel like, man, I could make this thing. This is really cool. And so I was really super passionate about it. I wasn't pursuing a career necessarily. I wasn't doing any of that. I was just a kid having fun. And but you get older, you try to figure out what you can do with your life. Got to go to college, got to do this, got to do that. Like responsibilities kind of pile onto you. And so I was doing this pretty much every day, all day, every day. I was on Polycount. I was on all the forums. I was, joining all the mod teams and doing all these things. And I thought to myself, it'd be pretty cool to do this for a living. So that's kind of when I started to take it a little more seriously. And obviously, you're 18 years old. You want to do something, you logical choice, you go to college, right? So I enrolled at a local school, and I went there for about one semester, and I quickly realized I just wasn't learning what I needed to learn to get to this level, to be in the game industry, to work in games. It wasn't happening. Like I wasn't getting the instruction, I wasn't getting the information that I needed to learn. And to be fair, there weren't a lot of as many video game centric programs back then. But I just realized this wasn't going to take me where I needed to go. So there was one moment there actually that was really eye opening, and that's kind of a good lesson. I found out that Blue Sky was right across the street.
Was that in White Plains or Connecticut?
That was in White Plains.
Yeah.
And they were just across the street. But nobody at the school knew anybody at Blue Sky. Nobody had ever talked to them. Nobody even knew they were there. And
we used to go eat lunch at that mall across, right there every single day. So we were always hanging out there.
Yeah, I was walking past that from the train to the school every day. And I was like, how do you, and that's a lesson to students, but then also to educators, right?
Yes.
If you've got a studio just down the street, go talk to them, knock on the door, form those relationships, because you want to make sure that your students are current and your students are learning what the professionals know and what the professionals are doing, because the industry moves so fast. You got to know. You got to know what the latest thing is so that your students can know.
Absolutely. Some of the best character modelers were there too, unbelievably skilled people were at Blue Sky, Mike DeFeo, people that were doing these crazy sculpts back in the day were right there.
Yeah. So, so I dropped out and I started learning all of this on my own. In my parents' house, and I bought all the books that I could find, which at the time there wasn't a lot, 2 or 3 like relevant ones. And then I started opening up different games and studying, like really studying how the professionals are doing this, and slowly you start to find like the people you really admire and really look up to, and a lot of that work was actually mind-blowing to me. Even at the time, it was just the models are super simple, the textures are really small, but then you look at it and you see the artistry. Every pixel is perfectly placed, and there's like lighting, how it's painted in there, and it was really, really inspiring and really cool. And so I kept studying. I would send emails to all the artists that I found that I looked up to, and I was, how do you do this? How do I break in? What do I do? What do I do? Tell me. And then not everybody replied. obviously, but there was one reply that I got that really stuck to me, and I think it's still true today. But basically, somebody told me, if you have to have someone teach you this stuff, then you're not going to make it. And it was pretty blunt, you know.
Yeah.
But it's still true. I think to me, a lot of what makes somebody successful, breaking into the industry, but then also staying in the industry and thriving in the industry, is how they learn, is how they get the information, how they get better. So if you need somebody to hold your hand, that's going to be really hard to do. You have to be a self-starter. You have to get this yourself. So, you know, everybody who's working in the industry, you know, all these guys are amazing, right? And they're always improving. You know, you're never done. You're never done getting better. There's always something that you could be doing because you're constantly competing. You're competing for jobs, you're competing for projects, you're competing for salary, whatever it is, right? You're always trying to one up what you did before. And so is everybody else. You know, like I said, Luis, like guys work full time, then they come home, they do another work day, just studying and getting better and doing these things. My first job, I worked 9 to 9 at the studio. We were 12-hour days, and then I would come home and I'd work until 4 a.m. You know, doing more art because I was driven. I was really passionate about this stuff, and that's the kind of drive you need to have to push through and to really succeed at this level. Let's see. One other thing I want to talk about too is early on, you know, you might not be super great, might not be, you know, you don't know everything, you know, you're just starting out learning. There's going to be a lot of rejection. So I applied everywhere. I applied to every single company I could find. I emailed everyone, hi, I'm Vitali. I like your game. Can I work there? You know, and for probably the first 6 to 9 months, I just got ignored. Nobody would even email me back. I mean, you know, and it stings, right? You send everywhere, you hope for the best, feel like you've got something, and you just get ignored. And that's how it goes. You know, a lot of people, you know, the companies are busy. You know, they're not going to waste their time or your time if you're not it. If you don't have what they're looking for, if you're not good enough, they're not going to waste your time. They're not going to waste their time. So don't take it personally. You know, that's the biggest thing with you know, young aspiring artists trying to break in. Don't take it personally. But if somebody does take the time to write to you and tell you, okay, you know, we're going to pass on you. Unfortunately, we're moving on to a different candidate. Ask them why. You know, it doesn't
Good
hurt
advice.
to ask. It doesn't hurt to find out. And early on, the most beneficial thing you can get is critique and feedback, and that's how you grow. Because these people are professionals. They've been doing this a long time. They know what they're doing, and the worst thing that can happen is they can say no, or they can just not write to you, or they can actually give you information about how you can improve, how you can get better, so you can get to the next level, you could get the job. So let's see what else we got here.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
As a character lead now, who, you know, sort of looks and does hiring and that sort of stuff, what would you tell yourself, you know, at the beginning of your career when you were applying to everyone and thinking about the portfolio you had back then, if you applied to yourself 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to even edit your portfolio and so forth?
So biggest thing, obviously, you're starting out and you may not necessarily know what you want to do. You may not necessarily know what's the job that I'm after, and what is the company that I want to work at. What is the style that I want to pursue? Because there's so many different ones, right? You've got, you know, everything from uber realism to super stylized, and you know, where's your passion? What drives you? What do you want to be doing for 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day, whatever it is, right? That is going to fuel you creatively and also make you grow and get better at that particular discipline. So you need to specialize. You know, you need to find what the style that you're going after, and then try to make art that somebody like myself at that company can look at and say, that looks good enough for us to plug it into the game tomorrow. And that's how you get the job. You get it by proving to somebody that you already can hit the style and you can hit the quality and you can be a functional piece in that art team, right off the bat. There's no guesswork.
Great advice.
Let's see. The only other thing, the biggest thing, the only other thing I want to talk about was once you do get into the industry, don't stop. Keep getting better, and just keep working hard. Because everybody is working hard. And being at a company working, all these hours, that is where you learn. This is when you're going to learn the most, right? Because you're going to be surrounded by your peers, and everybody's pushing each other. Everyone's trying to one up each other. But then there's also just an immense amount of camaraderie, and teamwork. And there's just, very few things quite like it. You're in the trenches with your friends, working on something really, really cool, and you're pushing yourself. Everyone's trying to do the best that they can. You guys are working together to make this cool project, and just enjoy it. And because at the end of the day, after you've worked all these hours and years and stuff like that, when the game comes out, it is just such a rewarding experience. It's really awesome.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So, just to sort of reiterate a point that you made, I always used to tell students when I would teach a portfolio class that if you are presenting your material and you are not the solution to a hiring manager's problem, then you are the hiring manager's problem, right? I don't know how many reels and websites and art stations you have to go through, but all the ones that are wrong are not comfortable, right? They're just like, oh, this one's wrong, this one's wrong. That is your work, right? But then when you get to somebody like that person is the solution to, I need that person here right now because they're going to help me get my work done, or these characters taken care of, then you find a solution to your problem. But up until you find a solution, that's part of your problem. I got to get through, 50 no's until I get to one yes, or 10 no's till I get to one yes. And so, I would always tell students, become the solution to that problem, and you have to research the studio. If you want a job at Epic, if you want a job at Naughty Dog, if you want a job at Blizzard, you have to understand the styles that they are working towards and target your work to become the solution to that studio's problem, and make sure that you provide them a solution. Because if you're just putting all your stuff in there and going, you pick and you figure out if I'm the solution, that's not helpful to the hiring manager. Would you agree to that, or what do you think?
Absolutely. The people that I've seen that succeed the most, that thrive the most, are the ones who are independent, who are able to operate independently, even when they're in the studio. So you don't have all the answers. You may not have concept art. You may not have a back view of this character. You may not have X, Y, and Z. And the concept team has moved on. They're doing whatever, right? So you need to be the one to own that piece of art and to make it your own and to drive and create solutions. Because, I think the people, again, who succeed are the ones who make the work their own. You take ownership and take pride over the things that you're doing, and that's what drives you to succeed and get better. And that's what also then helps the company. It makes a better game. It makes better art. It just everyone.
Excellent advice. Anything else you'd like to add?
I'm good. Yeah, let's.
All right. Perfect. Well, cool. Let us.
Sorry, my son is hiding behind me.
We got the guest artist. Well, with that in mind, Justin, how about the both of you go on?
Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I'll give you kind of a run through. My story is it's slightly different than Vitali's, in the sense that I didn't know I wanted to do this until much later than most people doing this figure it out. I did have an aptitude towards art as a kid. I did a lot of graphite drawing, a lot of sketching. My older brother got me into, one of my brothers, and it was something I always did as a hobby, but never thought, this is going to amount to much. And then growing up, for the longest time, thought I was just going to be a doctor. I had an older brother who was a doctor, and I thought I was just going to follow in his footsteps. So I went to school. I went into the pre-med program, and very quickly realized that I didn't want to go to school for another 12 years to do this. So started thinking about other options. And at the school I was at in Virginia, I had a friend who was taking an elective, and it was a computer art course. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Knew nothing about it. And entered the program. They were using Lightwave, and there's this quasi-sketchy teacher. It was a little weird, and there was like 5 machines, and they were all really slow. And the whole point of the project was just to build yourself in 3D and then animate yourself. And he had a lot of weird stipulations, like there was this one extra credit course that he had a list of celebrity actresses, and if you could model them, then you get an A, but he got to keep the model. It's very strange. But for me, it was like that. This is something interesting. This is something that I could see myself doing. Not necessarily the modeling or the rigging or the animation portion of things, but I really liked the color and the art of it all. And at the time, the only company I ever heard of was Blizzard at that time. And that was this teacher was everything Blizzard. If you didn't work at Blizzard, you might as well just quit. That's the only company you need to work at. So for me, I was like, okay, I guess that's where I need to go. But very quickly I realized, this is not the program I need to be in. It's just one of like the class. It's not a full program. I need to learn some more. And at the time, I had another brother who was going to school at Savannah College of Art and Design. And he was going to school there for sound design. And he's like, hey, if you want to do movies and games and animation and stuff, you should come here. So I transferred in my junior year of college, and at that point I knew a little bit of Lightwave, and that was it. I didn't know what Photoshop was. I didn't know what Maya was. I didn't know any of this stuff. So I had to take a really quick crash course in 3D at the school, and the program was decent, but to be perfectly honest, a lot of my learning, to Vitali's point, was just on my own. Like, I went to school full time, and after school, I was still going to school, trying to find as much information online as I could, because I just wasn't getting that information, at least comprehensively, for what I felt like I needed. And fortunately, I was surrounded by a lot of really talented kids in that school that are all working in either film or games today. And it was just this kind of perfect storm of kids who were passionate about what they wanted to do and had clear drive and clear determination. And to be surrounded by that positivity was instrumental in getting my first job, because a couple of them got out early and started working at Rhythm and Hughes and at Lucasfilm. And so having friends who worked there really helped in terms of networking and connections. And then for me, my first job ever was an intern at EA at Tiburon in Orlando. And I went to my first SIGGRAPH ever in LA. And I had reels, and it was on DVDs, and I was just handing out to everybody. And I had these silly business cards that were ridiculous. And nobody contacted me except this one recruiter at EA. And he's like, hey, you got some interesting stuff. I actually looked at my student reel recently, and it's a little face
painful,
isn't it? I can't believe I got a job on it. But I did this internship. I left school early, did the internship working on NCAA football on the Xbox 360, texturing stadiums. And it was super cool. You got free cereal every day, sodas for 25 cents. And it's like, oh man, this is living the dream. And texturing stadiums. And it was great because you textured all these really cool stadiums, but then at the end of the day, you had to shrink it down to 35 megabytes worth of texture information. So what you had just become blurred colors. It's like, oh,
so tragic. Okay. Yeah. What year was that? That was in
2004, 2005.
Yeah.
And then I went back to school, finished, and then no prospects. So, like Vitali, there was this community center that had a book of just every visual effects studio, from commercials, movies to games, imaginable. And I sat down one afternoon and went through the entire book A to Z. And I wrote down all the companies that I thought I'd like to work at. If it had a phone number, I wrote down the phone number, wrote down the email address. And funny enough, one of the contact information was Darren Aronofsky, director. I was like, oh, this is weird. And so I was like, oh, maybe I can contact his company and work for him. So I called the number, and it was his personal cell phone. Like, it was, hi, this is Darren.
How
leave me a
strange.
message. And I heard the beep, and I was like, hi, I'm looking for an intern. Never heard back. But I contacted everybody, and basically nobody contacted me. I think I sent out probably 150 to 200 emails and messages, reels and stuff. And then I just started working. I worked 3 jobs. I worked as a valet car parker at the Hyatt Hotel. I worked at Outback Steakhouse.
Dream
And I
jobs.
worked at this hotel as a banquet waiter. So I had to wear this penguin suit and serve food, people at weddings. And then during that summer, my friend who got a job at Rhythm Hughes was like, hey, we're doing an apprenticeship for lighting. You should apply. And I did. And long story short, I got the apprenticeship, and I was like, oh, great. This is my step in the door in lighting. I didn't really like lighting, but it's something that I labeled as something I could do. And then I got to Rhythm Hughes, and I remember the very first day of training in the lighting department. I'm looking at these dailies, and at the time they were working on the first night at the museum, and they had these amazing turntables of all these digital characters, these cowboys, these Indians, these Roman soldiers. And right in that moment, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to light. I want to paint those. I want to texture those. So it took me basically 6 months to go through the program, and then realize, okay, how can I transition out of lighting? And to be perfectly honest, I had to actually leave Rhythm Hughes to get into texturing because I kept wanting to back into lighting every time I asked to go into texturing. And then from there, I started working on various other studios in film over a course of like 15 years. I've worked on like 46, 47 films.
Wow.
And specialized just in texturing. And worked on a lot of big shops like Digital Domain, ILM, and Sony, and Method, and stuff like that. But all the time texturing. Moved into supervisory capacity probably 6 or 7 years ago. And then before I got to Epic, and to be honest, even last summer, if someone were to tell me, hey, you're going to be working in games someday, I would have just laughed at you, because I love film, I love the medium, I loved everything about it. And I did think about going into games a few years ago when I was in San Francisco. And I did have a conversation with Valve at the time. But, what I did was so specific. And it only seems very recently that some gaming studios are compartmentalizing the discipline of texturing. Whereas more often than not, it's someone who models and textures their own stuff. So finding someone who just textures is a very niche discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw the trend of what gaming was doing, and I had a bit of an epiphany last summer. And if I wasn't working at one of 2 companies in film, it's Weta Digital or Digital Domain, I wasn't working on the innovative stuff. I wasn't pushing the technology, the art. I was just churning out usual stuff, just rinse and repeat. And again, to Vitali's point, constantly trying to improve, I think, is what pushed me into really considering something different. And texturing stylized characters is something I've never done in my entire career.
What's the difference, that what you do, so that everyone understands the difference in what, maybe Adam or Colby or Vitali does when you texture, so that everyone understands. You don't actually pull and push the vertices. You're actually doing.
Yeah. So Colby and Adam and even Vitali, when he was doing the art, I don't know if you're even doing any characters at this point. no time. But they also texture as well. So what I do is basically a portion of what they do, but I do it full time. So they're modeling, and then they're reviewing their characters, and they're painting their characters, and then doing the look development and engine. Whereas I just do that second portion, the texturing and the look development.
Gotcha.
But the process is drastically different between film and game. But we are seeing some convergence, not only in discipline separation, but also technology. especially with Unreal moving into the virtual production space for film.
Right.
And even, everybody in film is just counting down the days until
it's all
real-time rendering is
in
the
Unreal
thing.
Engine. And what kind of
Because-
tools do you use every day?
So for me, right now, it's just Substance Painter, Photoshop, Maya, and then the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in film, I was using exclusively Mari. I mean, we have Substance Painter, but it is not the program of choice, although they just released painting across UDIMs, I think, yesterday, which is something I've been waiting so long for. So we're going to see some interesting shakeup there. And then with Quixel and their Mixer painting package, I think it's becoming a more prominent thing now, texturing. But yeah, those are the tools.
Yeah.
And then just that learning curve from film to game was a pretty steep one for me, because everything's rendered in film, and there's a completely different dynamic when you're working that way, especially when it's separating modeling from texturing from look development.
Right.
There's a completely different chain of communication.
So some of the challenges you have, right, is that you've got less geometry at times, right? So when character moves his arm, you've got stretching UVs. Do you have to address that stuff, or around the neck, or some of those things where you've got less
a lot
topology?
of that stuff isn't on my plate to address. That's
Yeah.
kind of more back to the topology and the reading of things. But for me, that's actually quite why I like painting, because all I do is that, and that's what I enjoy doing. And I think that's why I've gotten to the level I'm at, is because that's all I do 24/7. And for film, it's a very different advice I would give to students in terms of getting into film and to quote unquote character art. And in film, that's really either modeling a character, either painting a character, or either doing look development for a character. There are some studios that do the couple model and texture, the couple texture and look dev, and very few studios that do all three. So the advice I give to students in the past for film would be very different than maybe these guys would give to students going.
Right. Do you want to show any of your reel at any point here?
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, if you want, yeah. This is an old reel. It's like 2 years old at this point, but it kind of gives you an example of some of the work I've done, at least in film.
You want me to just play while you talk over a little bit?
Yeah.
All right, here, it's rolling.
Okay. So for me, I think my most favorite project when I was working in film was probably Chappie. It was an interesting project in the sense that it's one that we didn't think we were going to get, because what a workshop was working on a practical one, and we just assumed what it was going to do with the digital one. But at the time I was working at Image Engine, Neil Blomkamp obviously has a relationship with England at the time, so he was like, of course you guys are getting that. So that was a really amazing project to be on. It was incredibly extensive work on that one character. So it again, in gaming, there's a lot more limitations to what you can do, whereas in film, I mean, they put everything in. I think Chappie had about 285 4K UDIMs for the character, and then I had to paint about 14 or 15 different progressive damage states, and then each version of him had about 20 or 30 secondary maps. So we're pushing like hundreds of gigs of texture data just for that one character. And he wasn't even the biggest character in the film. There's a villain named Moose that had like 475 UDIMs the character. So Chappie had to be broken up into 5 different scenes just to paint one character.
Wow.
But that was really rewarding. Shame that everybody hated the movie. I thought it was going to be good, but it's just one of those things. I think of 50 projects I've worked on, I think one of them people like. I think Spider-Man: Homecoming was the only one. And it's funny because when you're working film, while you're working on it, you're like, man, this is going to be good. Everybody's going to love this. And then releases, and everybody just boos it. But then you work on something that you think is going to be total junk, and it comes out and everybody loves it. So you just never know. Whereas, the phenomenon that is Fortnite is just a totally different bag. Like, the reach it has versus film is unparalleled. And it's really interesting to see the fan base of Fortnite and the fanatical nature. I've got a couple nieces who got into it. My older brother blames me personally that they're into it now because they're playing like all the time.
It is your fault, by the way.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple movies in here that maybe somebody saw.
Yeah, just a few. And film is different, right? You work on a character and maybe see it in 2 shots, maybe 3 shots, and it's like, oh, that's my 5 months of work right there. Whereas in gaming, I find a fulfillment in the character work at Epic beyond anything that I experienced in film, even on the title characters like Chappie, because it's ever present. You know, a film releases and it's done. You see it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's done. Whereas with Fortnite, it's just there, and you can access it 24/7, and it's really, really fun.
Well, awesome, man. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
All right. Shall we talk to Adam for a little bit? And let me bring Adam up here and get a little bit of additional background.
Sure. So I, like Vitali and Justin here, like I kind of grew up drawing. Like my grandma was an artist. I had other artists in my family, but like I was always kind of encouraged to draw ever since like a really young age. So in my pre-teenage years, I was always drawing. Once I hit like 13, 14, high school age, pretty much stopped drawing altogether. Like stopped any sort of art, didn't care. I still took art classes just because it was like, it was like an easy class to take. It had nothing to do with like my love for art. It was just like, I can go in this class, I can fool around, I can pass. That's it, right? After high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't even really consider art. I didn't go to college for probably about 4 years after high school. So I just did I had a job cleaning carpets. I had, various fast food jobs, just whatever. And eventually I just kind of got sick of doing that, right? And I started thinking like, well, what can I do, for the rest of my life? What do I want to do? I mean, I don't want to flip burgers. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just wasn't enjoying it. Look, what do I want to do, right? And so I thought, well, maybe I used to be good at drawing. Maybe I can do something with that. So I was in Michigan at the time, and I was trying to find like a school that taught. I didn't even know what 3D art was. A school that taught like digital art. Because I figured, that sounds cool. That's what I want to do. Not even really knowing what I was getting into. So I took I did a 2-year associate's degree in graphic design. The whole time being like, I don't want to do this, right? But I just wanted to finish it to prove to myself that I could finish it, right? Like, so at this time I was probably like 22 or so. Actually, I think I finished when I was 24.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I didn't screw that up. So that's a good start. But then like partway through, I was like, I'm kind of digging this art thing. I don't like the graphic design, but what do I want to do? And that's when I started seeing, some digital double stuff. And this was quite a long time ago. So like, if you look back now, you probably wouldn't even call it that. But I remember seeing like a Bruce Willis digital double, and I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, how the hell did they do that? And so I started doing a little bit of research, and I found Maya, and I found Maya first. And I had my buddy rip me a copy of Maya. It was like Maya, I don't remember. It's on like some CD in my house somewhere still. It's like Maya like 4, something like that. And I got it on my got it on my mom's computer, and I was looking at it, and I had no idea. I was like, I don't even know where to start this, right? So then I was thinking, like, how do I get my foot into the door to start? Like, how do I start this process? If I'm really serious about this 3D thing, how do I start, right? So I started looking for schools around the Detroit area that would teach specifically Maya. That's all I was looking for. It's like, who teaches Maya? Show me how to do it. I can figure everything else out on my own. That's what I thought at the time. And I found there's a good art school in like right in Midtown Detroit called College for Creative Studies, and they had a 3D. They call it entertainment art. It was like, and they taught Maya. That was their software of choice. And I was like, okay, I'll try to get into that school, because it wasn't just like you could just sign up. You had to like get approved. So that summer I had to work. Actually, it's probably like 4 months prior to the semester. I had to work on a portfolio, and I hadn't like drawn anything good in years. So I had to. So I spent like lots of time, like free time, just drawing, copying images that I thought were cool, and like seeing if I could like make a portfolio good enough in like 3 or 4 months to like apply to the school. While I was doing that, a movie came out called it was called Hills Have Eyes. It was the remake, and I was watching I was watching the credits on it, and they were talking about this program called ZBrush that they used to concept it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what's that? So I like looked at it, and I was like, oh, it's like a sculpting program. I was like, that sounds cool. So I got my hands on that. And so while I was drawing, getting my portfolio ready, I was actually learning ZBrush. And ZBrush for me was much easier to learn on my own than Maya, because it was at the time it was sculpting. I didn't have like 50 tabs to open and like learn about like animation, rendering. Like it was just sculpting, right? So I started learning ZBrush before I went to school on my own. And eventually I got into the school. I mean, not eventually, within 4 months, I did get accepted into the school in Detroit. And it happened to be, it was a 4-year like fine arts program. We didn't even get into Maya until late the first year. But what I found very valuable about this experience, the school experience, is that besides learning Maya later on, and like, the end of the first year, and mostly in like the 4th year and 3rd years when we really got into it, was I had a lot of foundation art classes, or drawing classes, where we would do, draw like live models. We did a lot of like still life, a lot of like study of like light and shadow, form, all that kind of stuff. And like, if I look back at my whole college career now, yes, learning Maya was valuable. I don't think it actually fast tracked my Maya learning, because I had to do all these other classes in between. So like, if you think about like the span of 4 years, it's like, okay, yeah, I could have learned what I needed to learn in 4 years on my own if I wanted. But the information I got from these like career like illustrators and like fine artists has been like super valuable. And it has translated like directly into like 3D sculpting, which was something I never like expected. When I look back now, it's obvious, right? But at the time I was like, yeah, I'm drawing a lot. I'm drawing like our homework assignments were like 8 hours a weekend, probably just for like one drawing class. So it was like pretty intense. So like that translated directly into 3D. I didn't expect that. So that was really, really awesome.
I wanted to ask you something real quick, because I think that, specifically in the characters that you've worked on, a special project and stuff, anatomy is super important. And, what you've done and looking at your projects and your work, you've really got an amazing sense of anatomy. And I think you all have an amazing sense of anatomy. But, can you talk a little bit about, where you developed your sense of anatomy for one, and then also, drapery for clothing, and, just a sense of understanding that, because I think that, and some of the projects that I've seen from junior artists and students, anatomy can be a bit of a challenge, and they maybe don't look at enough reference, or they make up anatomy, and, or they hide behind fictional characters, and they're like, well, I'm making up the anatomy. But, when you hear good character artists talk, they're like, it's all based on what is, as opposed to making up anatomy, because that anyone can look at it and go, that's just not based on anything real, and people can see past that. Can you just share a little bit about, because it sounds like you may have learned some of that stuff in your fine art background, right?
I did. I started learning it in high school through going to like the gym. So in our weight room, they had like a bunch of like anatomy illustrations on the wall for like muscles. And like actually like weightlifting in high school, like you learn what like your tricep is and your bicep and all those muscles. So you like kind of inadvertently learn, the basics of anatomy through starting like that. Then when I got to college, drawing all of the like the live models and stuff, that like also, again, like levels up your anatomy skills. They had anatomy classes in college that I didn't take, which I wish I would have taken now. But I think what's more important than learning the names of everything is learning the way it looks, right? The way it looks and what it attaches to, and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you understand how something works, you can make something. You can make a similar mechanism in, say, like an alien arm or like an alien like life form. If you understand how the mechanics of something's supposed to work, you can make it up. And another thing that we all went to Andrew Corus's anatomy workshop like right before COVID hit. It was like February, like late February, no, something like that, early March, late February. I don't know, it's all a blur. And he said something that's really important, that it's something I think I've done for a long time without realizing it, is that he said a lot of artists they interpret, right? And they're bad at it. So they think something is there. They think it's supposed to be a certain way, and then they do it. Whereas if you want to be, like, if you really want to learn, you look at something, and then you copy it, and then you look at something, and then you copy it, and then you look at something, and you copy it. He said, if I don't see you standing like directly looking at the live model, and your model's right in front of you at the same position, if I see you like working on something on your model and the live model's facing a different way, then I know you're interpreting. So much of anatomy has not been through my interpretation. It's like finding reference online. So anytime I sculpt something, even if I think I know it, I find a direct life reference online to make sure that I'm doing it right. Right? Because even if you look at like a crochet, you can see the muscles, right? So I can sculpt that on a model, but it still doesn't look like it does in real life, because people are forgetting like the fat, the skin, all the like stretching and stuff that happens. So you always want to go back to life and see what's happening, and use that as your like reference point, rather than interpret or kind of make it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And then since then, like the anatomy stuff is just something that's interested me, right? So I've continued to learn it. I did a really big study on face anatomy at one point, and that's all because of Ready at Dawn, because we were doing so many like fax shapes and stuff. Actually, San Diego was doing them, but we had to critique them. So and these guys were like experts at doing them. So how do we critique something that somebody else is an expert at doing without knowing what we're talking about? So I had to learn like a lot of facial anatomy and muscles and just how like everything works.
Right.
And yeah, it's just partly through career, partly through like school, partly through like my own, like lifting weights and stuff like that. But it's kind of like a culmination of sources.
And the face is really particular. For those of you in the stream who don't know what FACS is, that's facial coding action system. And the face is so full of muscles that if you do that and you're just sort of guessing, the face moves because there's, dozens of muscles that pull it into shape. And if you're guessing, then it's definitely going to look weird.
And basically FACS is, it's breaking down individual muscle movements into like little pieces, and the combination of each individual muscle action when combined with the other one, like certain ones combined make expressions, right? So you're not just making an expression on your character, you're making like maybe like, like a corner puller, right? Where it's just like one muscle, like kind of doing that. And like the combination of that with like some like cheek razor and some other stuff is going to like create, a smile, right? So it's just a way of creating many, like it's supposed to be all the facial expressions, but breaking it down into small chunks of muscle movements. So that's what FACS is. But yeah, that's why I learned a bunch of that facial anatomy and did a study on that a while ago. So after college, I just went on to, I did an art test for Ready at Dawn. I got super lucky, got a job there working on the order, which was huge and awesome for my career. And then from there, I went on to Naughty Dog for a little while, working on Uncharted 4. And then I always wanted to come back east. So when I got the opportunity at Epic, I jumped on it, and I've been there ever since. So for the past like 4.5 years.
And you were telling us a story earlier about now there's a lot of technology, right? You can get these scanners and you can scan, clothing, and you can scan faces, but then when you hand it off to someone like you or Vitali or Colby or Justin or whatever, what do you do next? Because you get this huge point cloud data and you guys have to then turn it into, whether it's a game asset or a film asset, is not always the easiest part of your job, I would presume. And of course, there's amazing technology for doing photogrammetry and for converting point cloud data into functional game or film assets, but it's different, right? Turning it into functional assets that you can use in production still takes a tremendous amount of work, and you have to know what you're doing to convert that stuff. Quite often you end up rebuilding much of it, right?
So it's much better now. At one point, there was a lot of rebuilding. The scans could be, it just depends on your scanning setup, right? But a good scan now is pretty clean. I mean, so you'd have to go in and clean some undercuts, like the nostrils, take out the eyes, put the eyeball in, the ears. Well, previously, scans could be pretty messy, and then it would be harder to clean up. It's harder to know what data is accurate, on the surface, and what's not. So you don't have to do a lot of photo reference. You still have to line up cameras and make sure that what you're removing or what you're cleaning isn't incorrect, right? You still want to keep that digital double there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, after you get the point cloud, I mean, you're going to create a mesh out of it, bring that into ZBrush, basically clean it up, match it as close as you can to the reference, and then through several different techniques, depending on what kind of data you have, you're going to have to displace the poor data back onto the model, and then once you do that, it's a matter of basically if you're going to do any sort of stylization to it, and then you have to recreate the topology to make it ready for. And some of these processes are interchangeable. You can do the topology on first, and then reproject, and then clean it. It just depends on the process that you have set up at that studio. But yeah, it gets into workflow stuff and how you want to tackle the problem, right? So.
Well, before we jump and talk to Colby, I want to ask you, how do you continue? How do you specifically, when you're moving between still very stylized characters and very photorealistic characters, how do you continue learning now? How, when you go home after a long day's work, how do you learn more?
So sometimes I have, sometimes I do personal work. I never post anything anymore, so I can never get to finish it. But if I can share my screen here.
Yeah, please.
Sure. I'll be screen one.
I gotcha.
So, yeah, so this is just, I mean, I have a little bit of personal work I've been working on off and on here. This is, you guys can see it?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is just hand sculpt. It's not done, obviously. There's a bunch of parts, but it's supposed to be King Charles of Spain II. I don't know who that is. Read up on him. He's a bit of an unfortunate character, but yeah, he had some problems. Anyway, so I mean, the goal of this project was to see how far I can push the quality of the skin on the model itself. So you can kind of see here. If we get real close. Yeah. But yeah, you can kind of see it there. And that's just with texturing XYZ and some different inflates and stuff. And the next step would be, bring it into Engine and see how much further I can push it in Engine too. But so I do little half projects like that. And I also, I spend a lot of time on, that sounds funny. I spend a lot of time on my phone. After my daughter's in bed, I'll sit on my phone and I'll watch tutorials and I'll see what the latest stuff is to learn. And if something looks interesting or if there's a new tutorial, I'll go up and I'll watch it. So it's not, now that I have a family, there's not as much time to spend just sitting on the computer all night, but I still am glued to some sort of device pretty much at all times, learning, right? Even if it's not as hands-on as it used to be. But then if I find something, like I said, interesting, I will jump on my computer and try it out or try something new if I have an idea or something like that. But it doesn't culminate into a finished project like it used to prior to having a kid,
Sure.
at least right now anyway.
But you're not hesitant to go sketch out an idea to see how you might do it and implement something. You just go do it. Yeah.
No, I'll definitely, like, if I see someone that's doing something cool or someone that's doing something that's like, I'm like, man, how are they doing that? I will try to figure it out. And if I figure it out, that's enough. I get enough satisfaction out of that. I don't have to, I don't have to finish a project to show it. At this point, I'm just like, I figured it out. That's cool. I can use that if I ever need to, and that's it.
Yeah. You'll never figure out if you can do a backflip unless you try and do a backflip.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Let's not run out of time. Let's go talk to Colby.
Hey, so yeah, my journey into this position started when I was like maybe 7 or 8. I was like really obsessed with comic books, and I used to trace comics all the time. And I was really obsessed with action figures, and I really wanted to be a toy maker. That was my goal when I was a kid. I wanted to make action figures for a living. And as I got into high school, I was just drawing all the time, just like everybody else here, basically. And when I was like 13 or 14, my cousin founded a video game company in Vancouver, Canada, and I got to go on a tour one day and like beta test the game they were making. And I got super obsessed with video games. I hadn't really played games since like the NES era. I got obsessed with video games again, and he got me a copy of Lightwave 3.5. And I bought, every book I could find at the bookstore, like these massive manuals, like the size of a Bible. And they were essentially just manuals, and I would just read them and, hackily try to learn how to do like UV mapping or modeling. And I'd make these like horrible videos of like missiles flying through the air with like to the Matrix soundtrack. I was just like obsessed, and I started making like crappy CG stuff for like high school art class. And by the time I graduated high school, I had decided that I didn't want to do action figures anymore. I really wanted to become like a, movie director or something equally ridiculous. So I went to a proper university in Canada, and I was studying film production. And really quickly, you get there and you realize that like you're not going to get to do like be the star of your show. You're going to start to learn how to be a grip or something equally kind of unglamorous. And meanwhile, all the short films I would make in school were, I would go out in the weekend and just shoot like nonsense stuff, and then I would just like do tons of CG over top. I was making these really horrible CG heavy movies, with like creatures, and was doing green screen for people's productions. So after a couple years of university, I dropped out and I went to a 3D school in Vancouver called Vancouver Film School, which is pretty well known, I think, internationally. So year-long program, like a certificate program. And that was good. It was a good education. It was really intense. It kind of set me up for what the industry is like. I would sleep on the couch at school all the time, and worked super hard. And I chose to do the modeling stream. They have like a VFX stream, a modeling stream, and an animation stream. And right from the start, I was more into modeling. I used to model like really bad versions of like Vin Diesel in Fast and the Furious and Hellboy and stuff like that. And yeah, so I graduated, and like maybe like 2 weeks before graduation, it was like around the time that like Return of the King was coming out, or maybe the second or third Lord of the Rings movie. But we started seeing on CG Talk all these images of the beta testers, the guys that would eventually go and found Mudbox. They were putting up images of their Return of the King sculpts, and this is at a time when everything was being done like sub D, like poly by poly, hand modeled. And so like maybe a week before graduation, ZBrush, I think it was like 3.5B or one of those, came out, and I was so hyped about it. I like modeled a character like in a day. I figured out how to use the program. I modeled the character. I figured out how to normal map it. I baked it down to a low poly, and I put that at the end of my reel. And that was the thing that got me a job in the end, because the company that hired me, Raven Software, was like just fresh starting to do normal map characters. They had been doing like stuff like Jedi Outcast and all these kind of like, traditionally like the old school way of doing graphics. And they thought I knew how to do normal maps. They thought I knew how to do all that stuff, and so they gave me a job. I didn't know anything about that. It was totally, over my head. But so I managed to get a visa to come down to the States, which was a challenge in and of itself. And I worked there worked in the States for a couple of years before my visa expired, and I got kicked out of the country. And I went back up to Canada, and I worked for them for another year and a half on Wolfenstein. And the game was like, there was struggles. It was reboots, and kind of finding its creative entity was pretty hard. This is before like Machine Games took over that franchise, so it was sort of like it was a challenging project. And I eventually I left Raven, and I freelanced for 2 or 3 years, and that's where I sort of like worked on like a huge breadth of projects, a lot of different styles. Kind of found a bit more confidence with 3D, and then got sick of the lifestyle of an outsourced artist of doing freelance, and I took a job at BioWare in Edmonton, Canada, and I worked on Mass Effect 2 for I think it was about a year, and that shipped, and then I worked on Mass Effect 3, and then that shipped, and then right near the end of Mass Effect 3, I was like ready to take the plunge to try to come down to the States again, because that's a whole big thing, and I took about a year to get my visa. I got a job at I was buddies with this art director Kenneth Scott. He was formerly at id, and Kenneth recruited me to come and work on Halo 4, and it was a super cool experience. Very creative, very lots of cool stuff, aliens and armor and guns and everything, sci-fi. So I worked on a bunch of stuff for that, and then finished Halo 4, did Halo 5, and then I left Microsoft right at the end of Halo 5, and worked at Amazon for a really brief stint as a character lead on a game that will never ever see the light of day, which is kind of par for the course, but it was the first time I ever worked on a game that didn't ship. And then
lucky you.
And then now Epic, and my job is very different from my previous jobs. Like before, my job consisted of like day in, day out, get an asset, model it, texture it, ship it, next asset, blah blah blah. My job now is I don't really model characters at all anymore, or very rarely, and my job is purely like art directing and technically advising, and eventually shipping assets from our external art development partners. I think I manage personally like about 15 artists that work externally from the studio. And yeah, it's a different discipline, and it takes a different eye, but it's fun. And I guess to speak to that, it's like I think a lot of people. I saw some questions in the chat about people saying, I live in X country. How am I ever going to come work for Epic, or how am I ever going to come work for Blizzard? I've dealt with that myself. I would get job offers from like these great companies in the States, and I would know that there was no way I was going to get to come down because I would just never get a visa. I think that like working for one of these bigger outsourced companies, there's a lot out there, is a really great way to dip your toe into working on a AAA project without still being able to stay in your home country if visas aren't an option for you. I mean, we're in the days of COVID, and we're in the days of everybody working from home. I haven't been in the office none of us have for like 5 months almost. I'm intrigued to see what the future holds for game studios being able to take advantage of global talent now that in-person work isn't as much of a factor as it used to be.
Yeah, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
So you went through a lot of the work experience you've had, and I think that some people in the stream are like, oh, you got into ZBrush and then you end up working for Halo and BioWare and these amazing games, and I think it overwhelmed some people because that's a little overwhelming, right?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that there's no accounting for how talented you must be to be able to get those kind of jobs, right? And so I think that maybe this is for everyone to chime in on. I think there's a lot to be said for, if you are building your portfolio, you got to finish a lot of work, right? Like you guys are all really talented, but you've had to have been able to share the work that you're finishing, in order to get these gigs. You don't just get these gigs. You have to be able to prove that you are the person that can do this work as well. Because everyone here is really humble. I think that's one of the most amazing things I've learned about working at Epic is that, all these guys are super humble. They're really crazy talented. And no, you don't, I don't think just end up going to work at all these amazing studios. You have to be really talented. You have to finish a lot of work, and I'm sure that, Colby, you're crazy talented at what you do, but you finish work and you are able to present yourself well, and you have to be a really good, responsible person and all these things, right? In order to have even been able to accomplish all these great things you've done, right? And I'm not trying not to get you to be humble, because I think it's an amazing trait, but there's more to it than just, I showed up, I could do normal maps, and I got the job on BioWare.
Well, like that's a simplification, but I mean, it was the thing that got me in the door.
Yeah.
Because it was the buzzword at the moment, and I'm sure my portfolio was okay, but it's like, yeah, I mean, personally, like I wouldn't say like I am personally an exceptionally talented character artist. I think a lot of it just comes down to hard work, right? Like
hard work is super important.
But I don't know, 15 years ago, I remember being on MSN chat with Vitali, showing each other work in progress models at like probably 4 a.m. I used to, when I was in my 20s, I would sleep like 3 hours a night. I was just like him. I would do a 12-hour day at Raven. I would go back to my place, and I would literally stay up until 5 a.m, like on modeling forums. I mean, I'm in my mid to late 30s now, and those days are behind me. I have a kid now, but yeah, I mean, so much of it just comes down to hard work, passion, like Adam was saying, like keeping your eye out for the next big thing. But I mean, it's hard work. It's just hard work. I don't think anybody lucks into the industry and just can sustain a career 15 years or 20 years.
Absolutely.
Just on being either A, talented, or B, luck. It's exceptionally time consuming, and got to be super dedicated. But yeah, that might have been an oversimplification on my part, the normal map thing, but it was great time.
No,
but that goes back to Vitali's original point in terms of, I think very often a common mistake students do is they try to think of this really cool idea, and from my experience, oftentimes it's beyond what they can do in the time that they have, and a lot of them fall short because they try to take on too much. But if you know where you want to go, then that's where you need to focus your effort on. And if you want to work on Fortnite at Epic, look at that art style, look at the design language, and just focus on just that. Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is people to slot in. And if you're too busy thinking about the bigger picture of, is this going to be epic and grand and amazing all around, you're missing the whole point of a reel. And the point of the reel is, can you do what we do? That's either at ILM, that's at Epic, or that's at Sony. We just want to know that you can do that work. And if you're not presenting that, then it's difficult for us to.
Right.
And to get my portfolio ready, so it was my senior year of college. I had managed, and the traditional thing to do for that college, for that program, was you either do like a game, you make like a little modded game, or you the other thing was something else. I don't even remember what it was. But anyway, I talked them into letting me do 4 CG illustrations, and my argument was, well, that's what the illustration department does, and it's a BFA, so why can't I just do illustrations, but just do it for it? And they, to my surprise, they agreed. So I got to spend the whole year, basically, well, for that one, the senior studio class, working on like ZBrush models and illustrations and like texturing and like rendering and all that stuff. So like by the time I was out, I actually had 4 solid pieces for that time that I could be like, okay, here's 4 solid pieces that I've done, all in CG. Here's the model turnarounds. Here's the final illustration. I lit it, I rendered it, I textured it, I did paired it, everything. And then that got me a lot of not not like jobs, but it got me a lot of art tests, right? So like, hey, you seem like you can do stuff. Prove you can do this, right? So that was how I kind of like got my portfolio ready. It took about a year, right out of school, or my last year of school.
Focusing is most important, and often it's difficult for students to do that, right? Because they don't really know what they want to do, so they kind of want to do everything. But the first question I ask students that I've mentored or helped build reels is, what is your dream job? And you have to be as specific as possible, because that will allow me insight into where we need to put you and what you need to do. Sometimes I'll get students say, I want to be a visual effects supervisor. It's like, well, don't know exactly how to guide you there, but if someone's like, I want to be a character artist at Blizzard, okay, cool. This is things that you need to focus on, and more importantly, these are things that you just forget about, pretend they don't exist, because it's just going to waste your time away from the things that you really need to focus on, because there's so much competition out
there.
Yeah. One thing too is temper your expectations. Most people, you learn this stuff, you learn ZBrush, and you get, you feel like you get confident with sculpting and stuff like that. But there's so much to it. All these guys, it's a building process. You build up to it. Most people are not going to go out there and get a job at Epic right off the bat. They're not going to get a job at Blizzard or any of these studios right off the bat. So my first job was an environment artist in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And you just it's a foot in the door, and that's what kind of look at it that way. Sort of build up to it. Get in there. It's a job making art for games. Cool, go for it. At least learn what it's like to be in that soup, and how to swim, and then you kind of grow from that. So,
yeah, absolutely. I have a friend who his first job was the janitorial service at ILM. He was cleaning bathrooms in the art department, and so after hours he would hang around the art directors and the concept artists and the modelers and the DMS and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And he worked his way up into a supervisor. So there's never a linear path. And to Vitali's point, yeah, you need to often sidestep to get to where you want to go, and you got to play it more like chess rather than checkers, especially in this day and age.
Colby, did you have more stuff that you wanted to share? I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that was pretty much it. I was just doing the spiel on outsource and non-traditional avenues to working in the industry that don't require moving. Yeah.
How do you? I mean, you probably have a large group of people that you're reviewing their stuff, and I imagine there's a lot of different styles, and it's got to be an interesting challenge to bring everyone into the Fortnite art style and give them reviews and that sort of stuff. And that's another thing that is a whole different job and discipline within, character art, is making sure that everyone pushes in the right direction, in the same direction.
Yeah. The style is very specific. I think I can't speak to the early days of Fortnite like Vitali can, but it's evolved a lot over the years that it's gotten popular, and it's definitely a very specific style, and it does take a lot of effort to make sure that assets come in and fall in line with the internal standards and the look of the characters. But yeah, with time, I guess every artist, it takes a little bit of time to kind of find it, but they get there, and that's with any game industry job. Like, depending on how specific the art style is, it's not gonna happen overnight. It requires a lot of practice and rinse and repeat to sort of land your feet. You want to speak with that, Vitali? I feel like you're probably better versed in this than I am.
No, man. I mean, I think it takes. I think one of the things that we look at, especially like I can go back to like recruiting and stuff, and one of the things we ask people is like, what do you see? Like, what does your eye see? And that's another, I think, critical point, I think, for people to also work on, that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. A lot of people focus on like, well, I'm sculpting this thing, and I don't want to know all the ins and outs and everything like that. But it's just like, what are you seeing that makes this thing look the way it does? What makes this successful? What makes this appealing? And once you can recognize that is, or you're already halfway there. right? Once you've recognized the thing that makes it look that way, you can replicate it and you can fold that into your own work. So once you see like those specific points of like, okay, this is what they're doing here, doing here, doing here, this is how it works and this is how it looks, I can try to replicate it and I can try to kind of follow the same formula to achieve the same look.
So would you say that if junior artists or students are interested in working at Epic, they should try and make Fortnite-like characters and put those on their reels and submit that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'd be doing.
Of course. Makes perfect sense.
I mean, the thing that I would be doing is I'd be studying. Everybody's got, right now you have ArtStation, and it is such an incredible resource, right? There's just so much stuff, and every time you go on there, it is mind blowing,
inspiring.
Right? How just the people out there are insane, and there's so much out there, that you could just look at, that you can study, that you can learn from. Without necessarily getting a step-by-step tutorial, without getting a video, you can just see the art. Sometimes people will show you kind of behind the scenes how they did it, but a lot of times you can see like what are the steps that they're getting, like what is cool about this, try to recognize that and learn from that. So just looking at a lot of art, and going in that direction, I think that would be the biggest advice, is just look at a lot of art that falls in that category, that style, and try to figure out what makes it tick.
ZBrush Central is another amazing resource.
I mean, they're all insane. Like, if I had that resource when I was in school, then, I mean, I don't know if it would make any difference, but it definitely draws a lot more inspiration.
Yeah, you might be really like working at an amazing company if you had that back then, right?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I was going to say ZBrush Central was like, I think, a key component of like where I'm at today, because it was super popular when I was in college, and that was this. When you're in school, or when you a lot of people kind of like they want to get an A, right? I always looked at ZBrush Central and I was like, this is what I have to do. This top row, my goal is to get a top row of ZBrush Central post before I got out of school. And I think that's what propelled me. It wasn't so much like my peers in school. It was the art community that you see online. And I think that's what those are the standards you have to hit. It's intimidating, but I mean, it's kind of true, right? If you're not hitting those standards, if you're not there, then it's harder to get noticed.
And that's actually a good point that you bring up, is that one thing I try to instruct a lot of students is to be active in these communities. You can't work in a black box and expect to land a job. You have to put your stuff out there. You have to promote yourself. This industry is just like film. It's very interesting because we're in many ways the talent, right? So just like if you were to equate this and shift this over to film and actors, you have the talent and you have the crew. But, actors have publicists. They have managers. They have agents. They have all these people doing all this stuff that we have to do ourselves. And so often artists in school that are trying to get jobs, they neglect the promotion aspect of marketing, building essentially a brand of who you are. So when you're getting out there, people know your stuff. And there's a difference between saying, oh, Colby works at Epic versus Epic has Colby Jukes. And that distinction is very different because these are the people marketing themselves independently from where they work and creating an identity. And that can tremendously propel someone's career. But you have to be active. You have to contribute and share.
I think we need jerseys and numbers.
That'd be awesome.
Let me ask you a couple questions, guys, because we're going to run out of time with the stream here in a few minutes. But there's been some questions about software in particular, Blender. Of course, we've talked about ZBrush. Name, do you guys use Blender? Name some other really important software that maybe some of these guys, I want to ask that question. I also want to ask the question about hardware. Do you need to learn to use a stylus and Cintiqs, and do you need to invest in those things as young people and students? Can you give us a little bit of advice about some of those things? And then Vitali, you also mentioned ArtStation. Any aspiring character artist must have an ArtStation, and can you guys talk a little bit about those things?
Sure. I'll start with ArtStation. So I made my own website, naimushin.com, and I tracked to see how many people actually view it. And I essentially took all those same images and just put them on ArtStation, just because everybody was doing ArtStation. And I'm like, okay, cool. I guess I'll do this too. It's fine. Put all my stuff there. The number of views just dwarfs my own personal website, and the amount of time I spent setting it all up is absolutely just like maybe like 1/100th of the time that I spent, dealing with WordPress and all that stuff and blah blah blah. So, and ArtStation is also super accessible, right? Everybody's got one pretty much, and if you're looking for an artist, chances are they have an ArtStation. It's super easy to find, and again, it's just a great place to go look for inspiration and for all the other artists. So if you're trying to get in, you're trying to build a portfolio, do ArtStation. You're going to spend way less time trying to set it up. It's going to get right to the meat of it, of just showing your artwork. And that way you can focus on the artwork. You don't have to worry about fancy flash screens and, WordPress overlays and things like that. You could just literally do the art, show the art. And for hiring managers and recruiters and stuff like that, they look at millions of websites. If you have a simple website that's just a simple ArtStation page, that is the best thing. That way they look at it, they see it, they like it, they
know it.
If they don't, they know exactly. So.
And it works for you 24/7. Even when you're sleeping, it's working.
Great advice.
And it's free.
Mm-hmm.
Free is good.
Free is good. Free is good.
But to the hardware thing, I was curious. When I got to Epic, I noticed everybody was using Cintiqs, and personally, I can't do it. I always want to like move my hand out of the way when I'm working. So for me, it's very much a tablet in the traditional way. But I've got friends who just work completely with a mouse. I mean, they paint textures with just a mouse, which is kind of crazy to me. But I don't think there's one. I don't know if you guys can chime in. I don't think there's one specific way to do it. It's just.
I always used to, all through school and all through Ready at Dawn, it was always just a tablet. And then when I went to Naughty Dog, they had every character had a Cintiq, and I was like, they're like, we can get you a tablet if you want. And I was like, give it a go. And I had the same problem Justin did. I hated my hand on the screen, but I'm so used to it now that like I've tried a tablet and I'm like, oh, what the heck? So either one is perfectly fine. But I would definitely say like, I don't even know what Intuos number they're on now. I think the last one I had was an Intuos 4. But like, if you don't want to splurge on like a Cintiq, then I would say like whatever Intuos is out there right now is probably the way to go. It's much cheaper, and it does like you can do just as good of work with one.
You can put it in your backpack and take it along.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've seen students spend just a ridiculous amount of money on something and then still not finish a project. So, don't go out and say, I can't do it without a Cintiq, because it's just not realistic, right?
What is super helpful though is at least 2 monitors.
Yeah.
That is like key. 3 is good, but 2 is essential.
I bought a used Graphire tablet when I was in college. It was like $65.
The little ones?
It was like baby blue, tiny.
Yeah.
I used that thing for like a decade. It wasn't until I think it wasn't until I was working at Microsoft that I bought myself my first Cintiq. But then you don't want to use the Cintiq and then try to go back to the tablet. That's pretty difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Once your muscle memory or whatever gets used to hand on screen and then you go back to the tablet, it feels like you're using like crayons or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, you definitely, like you were saying, Justin, that somebody, like actually textures with a mouse. I used to do this. I used to just work with a mouse constantly. And then I had this claw hand afterwards. And it would hurt, actually. It would seize up, and it was terrible. So early on, like I just threw it away and I switched to tablet. Just holding a pen just felt so much more natural. My hand felt great. I could work, as long as I wanted to, and it was just so much more natural. And then as far as like Cintiq Intuos doesn't, I feel like it's, personal preference, that kind of thing, but the pen is essential to me, because it's so much more like an extension of your hand. And you don't have that claw grip, and it's just so much more durable,
Yeah, and the pressure sensitivity, because of the mouse, it's just like
oh yeah,
one speed.
I want to ask one other question. I personally, I judged a Well, both Mark and I participated in the rookies competition, which is this huge student competition. I think Justin, you also participated in it. And there's lots and lots of character art. And I personally have this personal issue when I see a lot of character art and people go through they work really hard to make this beautiful character, and then they present it in a T pose or an A pose with zero expression on it, right? I'm like, you bothered to do all this work, but then what I get to see is this lifeless character in a T pose, right? So I love to see people who go to that extra step of posing the character, which you can now do in ZBrush, and giving it just a little bit of life to let me know what this character is supposed to be aside from what it's wearing. And, do you have opinions about, characters, especially as a hiring manager or whatever the case, being posed or unposed, when it comes to presenting your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an extra step. It just shows me you care. It shows me you thought about what this character might look like, what kind of expressions he might have, or she, or it, whatever. So it just shows me that there's more thought being put into and more effort being put into what you're doing than just the bare minimum. And you're not afraid to get in there and try to move things around. And another thing that's really cool about that is you are thinking about that, right, as an artist. So that's there's a whole interaction with all different departments, because we don't work alone. We don't work in a little isolation. We deal with rigging all the time and animation and things like that. So our work has to fit and has to work for them as well, right, in order for us to make the best character possible, right? It's a multi-department thing. So when you have somebody who's already thinking about that, that's a step in that direction, a step in thinking about the final result. What's the final result look like? Not just the T-pose, you render it out, it looks beautiful. What's the final result on screen for the player?
It also shows like composition, like lighting skills, just like an overall eye for like a final image. So it's part of character art, right? You can't separate the two. So a lot of times when I see like just T-pose characters, they're lit horribly. They're like not framed. Like there's no composition in the framing. So it's not just the T-pose. It's the whole presentation, and it's all one. It's all art. It's all one thing, right? So
it feels unfinished.
That's totally it. I think what students have to remember is that at the end of the day, we're creating art, and any good art should elicit some sort of emotional response. And if it doesn't, you need to think about the art that you're doing. So at the end of the day, it has to elicit some kind of emotion, whether it makes someone angry or happy or sad. Something. That's what good art does.
Very good point. Yeah.
To be the one contrarian in the group, I would say, if you're going to pose the character, make sure you got a good pose. And if you're going to light it, make sure you light it well.
Yes.
Right.
You could take a so-so model and make it a lot worse by giving it a really janky, badly weighted pose and lighting it horribly. Like, for my money, like a lot of my stuff in my portfolio is just production T-poses, because I'm very much a production modeler. I don't look at myself as being an artist. I look at myself as like I'm a cog in a production. And it's like a lot of times when I've reviewed portfolios for interviews, I don't really hold it against people if they just show me screenshots of some badass model in ZBrush, because I'm like, hiring you to be a badass in ZBrush. I don't really care if you can light or compose a picture, but I'm not saying these are bad skills to have. It's awesome to have these skills. It's just like, it's not going to rule you out from me hiring you if you only can do amazing models and low polys and show me a screenshot in Marmoset with it in T.
Yeah, I mean, from a texture perspective, for when I was hiring, the same thing for me. It's like, I want to know that you can texture. But, people who want to give it some more life and they don't have the expertise, that's a good time to collaborate. Find someone who is a rigger. Find someone who wants to build their lighting portfolio and say, hey, I'll give you this character if you light it for me, and we'll give credit to each other. That's such a great way to collaborate even in school, because a lot of times in school, you hoard your space, you do your own thing, and then you try to get ahead. But collaborating in school is part of building the rapport and the social dynamic. I think that is very much lacking in education, is how do you deal with other people as an artist in a professional workspace. There are no classes on that. Nobody teaches about it. Nobody talks about it.
And then I think we can encourage the educator too to push his students to do that extra step too, why not?
Yeah, because with the specialization that's happening these days, someone knows they want to be a rigger. Great. Find someone who can model. That way everybody wins because I'm rigging a model that is far better than what I could have done because I don't want to do it. Or I'm lighting a character that's far better than one that I could have modeled.
Mark's going to explode up here.
I was going to ask a question because I've been very quiet this evening. Even though you're all doing separate parts of, as you say, at times pipeline, how important is it to keep in mind the actual character in the character art? Not to just get lost in the anatomy or the surface or everything else, to actually maintain the character.
Well, in Fortnite, it's the character is everything, right? That's the first thing you see is the, kind of like what Adam was saying when he moved on to the project. It's the first read. It's the emotion that it elicits. That's the main thing. And, obviously, once you get past that, you want to make sure everything is functional, right? And the clothing is constructed in a believable way. The anatomy is correct. All these kinds of things. But the actual, feel of the character, the attitude is super critical, right? That's character art.
And do you actually get backstories given to you about what their motivations are and what their histories and stories?
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Rarely.
I think for me, one thing that struck me pretty quickly when I joined Epic was coming from film, we're doing photoreal. And as Adam knows, with photoreal is just make it look like that. There's no interpretation, just make it look like that. And that was my job for 15 years. So coming to Epic, where it's let's create something that doesn't exist in real life. A lot of people in the industry I was in before, they'd look at a Fortnite character and right off the bat, they're like, well, that's just kind of a flood fill color, some box modeling, and you're done. But once you start digging into it, there's an incredible finesse to the design language that is a very precious thing at Epic, and you learn about that as you go, and it gives you a much better. I have a much better appreciation for stylized content in general over the past 6-7 months I've been at Epic than I ever did before, because it opens your eyes to what can be as equally artistic, but equally as challenging. Because so often people think, oh, it's stylized, it's easy. It's not easy. It's very difficult. Again,
one of the things I've often had to explain to students is doing something very simple is really hard because you have nowhere to hide. If you take ZBrush and start covering it with all kinds of fancy stuff, you can hide things and make it look interesting. But if you go simple, it's got to be right.
Yeah, doing some of those faces in Fortnite, like they're simplistic, yet every little wobble, you can't cover it up with a pore, or you can't blame it on saggy skin or something like that. Like, it's like, damn it, man.
Well, it's like concept art these days. Like, there's so much 3D concept art out there that personally drives me nuts because they hide all of the flaws. And especially when it's done in 3D, you can hide anatomy and physiology. You can hide bad form and function through a pretty looking picture. And so many people in the film industry eat up the pretty looking picture over the fact that can't physically move. I mean, look at that. That can't physically move. And we're going to put this in production. That's going to drive everybody nuts. It was poorly designed. So starting with designs in 2D and fleshing out that first is so drastically important, in my opinion, before you can go.
Well, guys, I hate to do it because this has been such an amazing stream, but we are going to have to say goodbye for today because we are just now a couple minutes from the top of the hour, and it's been really an amazing stream. And I want to thank you all very much, Vitali, Justin, Adam, Colby, and of course, Mark. Thank you all so very much. What typically happens for those of you who have not participated in our streams before is that, of course, the VOD remains on Twitch. But then in, a couple days, a week or so, we convert that VOD into a YouTube file, and then that'll go onto our playlist, which is on unrealengine.com. So, we've had so much good conversation, I think, in this particular stream about becoming a AAA character artist that we really hope that you guys come back and rewatch this and get all this really good discussion back. And hopefully you guys will come back and we can maybe do part 2 of this stream at some point, maybe a couple months from now, because I'm sure that there's plenty more discussion we can have about this. And I think that people will have, we didn't really get a chance to address some of the other questions that they would have had, but I think we exposed a lot of really super valuable things. So thank you all very much for tuning in today. Once again, thank you all for participating in the stream today. And everyone, please stay safe, and hopefully you'll have a good weekend. And cheers, everybody.
Thanks very much.
See you guys.